welcome to the podcast where together, every Monday, we explore hospitality in its very broadest sense. From culture and cooking, cocktails and coffee, nutrition and farming, politics and animal welfare, organic and sustainability, family and business, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. Come and learn with me, Mark Cribb, about where our food and our drink comes from, and the businesses and, more importantly, the human beings that thrive on where we decide to spend our time and our money. Sign up to our weekly newsletter at humansofhospitality.co.uk and hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. Hi and welcome to this week's episode. I'm recording this on Sunday the 11th of October, and the world of hospitality is still being thrown to the wolves, unnecessarily so in my personal opinion. We now have the insane situation in Scotland where you can go out and enjoy some lunch, but should you wish to have a glass of wine with it, you'll need to sit outdoors. And if you want to eat dinner, no chance, closed by 6 p.m. Rumours are that parts of England could be heading the same way, yet the evidence still strongly demonstrates that transmission rates in hospitality venues are negligible, and everyone working in that sector is still doing such a great job in keeping people safe, as we always have done. We should be being held up as an example for others. Look how many tens of millions of people have been served by hospitality, and look how few transmissions there have been. But instead, I believe criminally, the government are doing quite the opposite, throwing hospitality under the bus and blaming us for high transmission rates, whilst the evidence shows that people are transmitting at home or in private parties, and still even at care homes. It's all too easy to blame our sociable sector. The Cancel the Curfew campaign means that the government have been under a tsunami of feedback from the industry, and I cannot believe that they are unaware of the catastrophic impact that they are having on our sector. And I think many of the public are on our side, and those that are following the data are now losing trust and faith in the government's erratic rules and changes that seem to follow such little logic. Maybe enough Conservative MPs will rebel and vote for change. I've certainly been speaking with my local MP regularly to give feedback on the illogical and disproportionate impact they are having on an industry that I love so much. So sign up, cancel the curfew, go and find it online, share it, speak to your MP. Let's see if we can get this sorted. Anyway, frankly, talking about it is becoming tedious, and I want you to enjoy the next hour, so let's move away from banging our heads against a brick wall and go on a 60-minute learning adventure. Finally, we are doing a sustainability episode. And I say finally because regular listeners will know that sustainability comes up a lot in my conversations when we think about farming and plant-based diets and the impact on the environment of what we eat and what we drink. But what I'd not really touched on thus far was the sustainability deep-rooted into the actual design of venues and the business itself. Because surely it all starts there. If the restaurant itself is smashing its way through unnecessary fossil fuels, or using poisonous materials, or chopping down virgin rainforest to make the furniture, then clearly that would be pretty outrageous. So David Chenery, today's guest, has been deeply buried in cogitating on what sustainable design means for a number of years. David's not an activist, but he wants to find a way to live on planet Earth and ideally leave it better, or at the very least, not make it worse. A goal I share and admire and consider on a frequent basis. David has spent a number of years as an interior architect and design consultant at Object Space Place, and has had a career specialising in commercial interiors in a varied range of international and UK-based retail stores, hair salons, restaurant concepts, and luxury fashion department stores. But more recently, he's doubled down and focused on sustainable hospitality and what that might mean. David's been working on a restorative restaurant framework built on the principles of a circular economy and designing with end of life in mind. Now, within that are some fascinating perspectives, and I'm confident you're going to enjoy this chat, and it's certainly going to get you to think. I'm hoping that most people who listen regularly to this podcast have an interest in food and drink, and thus an interest in its provenance, and are more likely to be interested in real food, rather than processed food. And if we care so much about where our food comes from, we should also care about our impact on the environment. As David says, if we're happy to invest in free-range eggs, we should also probably be willing to pay for FSC accredited wooden furniture. Pay a little bit more, have far less of a detrimental impact on the planet. Kind of makes sense. So we chat about the importance of the stories of sustainability, or the accreditation of sustainability, and how for me personally, in an industry where we are so used to chatting to customers about the journey of their food or their drink, who produced it or caught it or made it, how many miles has it travelled, naturally extending that to where the recycled bar top might have come from, or how the furniture has been reclaimed from an old church or school rather than ending up in landfill, feels like an easy extension of what we do. So I hope you enjoy the conversation, and as always, if you do, can I please ask for a couple of very quick favours? Firstly, pick up the device you're listening on, scroll down to the review section, hit 5 stars and subscribe. And if you can, even leave just a few words. Now, this is mutually beneficial. It's a pretty time-consuming process putting together a weekly podcast, but your positive reviews make it much easier for me to attract better guests to the show. That way, we both get to enjoy the conversations and the insights more. And if you're feeling really flush, which I appreciate in the world of hospitality right now is pretty bloody unlikely, then you can also leave a donation via the website by clicking on the Patreon page, or by going to paypal.me/Mark Cribb and donating anything you fancy quickly and easily there. I'll use the cash to travel the country finding awesome guests to chat to. And if you don't, I'll fill the podcast with irritating adverts and then you'll be sorry. Okay, I'm just kidding. You can, of course, just sit back and enjoy the show. Right, enough of my waffle. Let's head over and chat to David. Enjoy. David Chenery, welcome to the podcast. Hugely appreciated. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And you've come to me in sunny Bournemouth, a town I understand you actually know reasonably well.
I do. It's fun to be back. It must be a good 10, 15 years since my parents moved away. This is where I grew up in Bournemouth. So it feels kind of familiar and strange all at the same time to be sitting on the beach talking to you.
Yeah, and
next to the beach.
Yeah, I've rudely sat. You should be facing the ocean, I've realised, because
it's absolutely fine.
I didn't want to be looking at my kitchen because I'd end up standing up and getting involved in some way. So now you get to look at the kitchen.
Makes sense.
And I get to look at the
ocean.
ocean.
I can just make some faces and look all worried that they're doing something wrong, and you can run over.
Yeah, well, you can at least look angry when they keep shouting in the background. And after I've turned the music off at least, but unfortunately, can't get them to start chatting. So. Although you're from Bournemouth, how long ago was it you've left? Because you've not been to this restaurant before, have you? Outrageously.
I have not. I apologise deeply. I left, I want to say about 2000, went to uni in Brighton, and then gravitated to the bright lights of London where the work is.
Yeah, that's
Cut
what
my
happens,
teeth.
isn't it? Okay, well, I can forgive you for that because we weren't here in 2000. So I think it was 2005, something like that. So, we'll forgive you. I listened to a couple of other podcasts you've done yesterday. You made me laugh out loud, and I freaked a guy out. I was actually out for a run, and I ran past this guy. I didn't notice him, but he was just pruning his bush in his drive. And I think you said something along the lines of, a client interested in sustainability is generally not an arsehole, which I just thought was a great strap line.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
So I thought at the very least, you're interested in sustainability, I'm interested in sustainability. We can pretty much guarantee that for the next hour, people can listen to a conversation that's not between a couple of arseholes.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Let's hope.
Is that
Absolutely.
reasonable? He looked at me in shock when he turned around because I looked like a loon as I was jogging down the road laughing to myself. But thank you. So we're going to have a good chat about sustainability, and I was interested in, and having known a little bit about your story. So you're from Object Space Place, an interior architecture company fundamentally, but now very much right at the top of your website it says carefully crafted sustainable designs. And I know you're interested in hospitality and your sort of niche has evolved over time, but I was interested, that word sustainability, which is now key, at what point did you add that to your website? Is that very recently?
It's fascinating, isn't it? I think we have always cared about doing things the right way. I mean, genuinely having integrity. I mean, my definition of integrity is doing the right thing when no one's looking. So, in our office, Brenda, my business partner, and I will have a conversation about doing something. And if we just don't think it feels right, either treating someone some way or cutting a corner somewhere, you just don't do it. And sustainability is part of that piece, I think. But maybe over the last 3 or 4 years, we never felt that we could put it out there and say, hey, we're sustainable designers, because I think a bit like when you meet someone who's a vegan, there can be quite strong feelings around people who are talk about sustainability. Are you sustainable enough? Are you vegan enough? Are those leather shoes? Oh, I don't know if that counts. And so I wouldn't say we hid it, but we wanted to pursue an agenda of sustainability where we were learning, we were developing our skills, we were finding out and researching what we could. And then we wanted to try and convince and adjust and help our current clients and our current client mix to move them towards being more sustainable. And that is a terrible idea, because unless someone comes to you with an understanding of the value and the need to think sustainably, most hospitality or design projects, they're so challenging in themselves. The commercial reality, the timing pressures, the desire to be successful in a massively competitive market, that the sustainability pieces can often be seen as a nice to have, and they can get kicked out. You've got time pressures, you've got to do it in a week. Let's find some more chairs. Right, let's go online on the internet. What can we buy? Can they be here tomorrow? And that was kind of really frustrating for us. So I think at the beginning of this year, we just thought, okay, right, sod it. This isn't enough. We want to go all out and talk about sustainable hospitality design. We want to, we love the hospitality industry. We love creating designs to set the stage for experiences, and then you get a depth of experience in hospitality you don't get in retail and things like that, and we love that world. And we can see that the design for hospitality is just not sustainable enough at the moment for so many reasons that we can dig into, and we wanted to be the ones to try and make that change. So we've just thought, right, we need to do all the research we can. How can we change this? How can we make things more sustainable? And that involves us also sticking our heads above the parapet and saying, right, we are involved in sustainable design. That's what we do, and we will hold ourselves to account in everything we do to make sure we can deliver that, which is, to be honest, a really interesting journey for us, because we're, every day's a school day. We're learning, we're pushing ourselves, we're trying to find the next level, trying to find what actually constitutes sustainability, because there are many, many different ways of looking at that. I mean, in simplest terms, I guess for me, sustainability boils down to us doing things that mean tomorrow we can keep on doing those things, whether that's about where you source your food from, how you treat other human beings, how you build spaces with natural resources. So we literally need to create systems whereby they can sustain themselves. That's a very long answer to your question.
Well, it wasn't a date, was it? You could have said the 1st of February, Mark, but that would have been a very dull answer. So actually it was much better that you expanded it. And that was, I suppose, my point, because you're now a niche within a niche within a niche. And it's a very brave thing to do, because lots of people are interested in sustainability. Lots of restaurants, there are a couple, Silo obviously sort of hung its hat on that. Locally, we've got, I think it's called the Greenhouse Hotel. So some people go out and say, right, we're all about sustainability. And I've always been very careful to say, we absolutely should focus on everything we can, but fundamentally we are having a negative impact in some way, almost by our pure existence. Just the fact that I sell coffee that somehow has to be transported around the world, for example. So although we will do everything we possibly can, and for me that's about integrity and looking people in the eye and saying that we have decided what compromises to be made, fundamentally, unless you are a vegan, sort of sat at home, never going out, without the lights on, it's very hard to see how you're not having some sort of impact. So for you to put that on the front of your website, presumably therefore you must turn certain clients away now. What's the definition of sustainability for you?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I do think, I am not an activist. I am a people person. I want to build bridges with people, and I want to bring people on a journey with us. I think it's important that everyone is on a journey. There are people I talk to in the last 6 months, there are people who are way ahead of me in terms of their own journey and knowledge around sustainability. Chefs who are trying to build completely circular restaurants to the point where they want to process the human waste coming out of toilets and turn that into drinking water within their own footprint of a seriously impressive, interesting
It's quite a brave
stuff.
thing to put on your menu, isn't it?
Well,
recycled toilet water.
He hasn't done it yet, so
Okay.
but we'll see. But there's some really impressive people, and there's some real firebrands and activists in there. And for me, I'm certainly not at a point where I would be preaching to anyone, but I would like to think that we can help people along that journey. And really, sustainability is a part of someone acting with integrity. Yes, there are increasingly challenging conversations where someone says, because we will discuss sustainability as one of the first things when we're talking to someone, and some people will be honest and say, I want to be sustainable as long as it doesn't cost me anything. And that's a really challenging place to be, and it's natural because we want to carry on business as usual, because it's hard. Running a restaurant, being successful, doing all of that stuff is hard alone. To do this extra thing, this sustainable thing, or what's seen as extra, adds an extra burden. And if it's going to cost more money, that's, the margins in hospitality are not awesome, mainly because there's so much competition. But people are scared to do that. The reality is it doesn't have to cost more money to be sustainable. But if you get drawn into an argument around money and whether money is going to be the be-all and end-all of a project, it's very difficult to put sustainability at the heart of that project. So yes, there are conversations we have with people where it's clear that they are not interested at all in that, and therefore there are a lot of other good designers out there that they can go and talk to. But we've got a mission. We are trying to move forward, and we need people that can see that and buy into that. And
I love the fact that you're brave enough to do that, and fortune favours the brave eventually. But there can be a time lag, I suppose, isn't it, between putting your head above the parapet and saying, okay, we are going to stand for this, and enough people joining the movement to support you, I guess.
It's true. I mean, we've doubled down on that niche even further during COVID. I mean, naturally, we are in the business of designing physical spaces for people to socialise in. Coronavirus is not super helpful with that. So given that, like most places, our turnover dropped off a cliff in March, down 50-75% of what it should be, well, what have we got to lose? We've got nothing to lose, and we want to do this in the right way and build back in the right way. And be as helpful as we can to the industry. There's going to be a lot of opportunities coming out of this once we get through the next 6, 12, 18 months of pain. And for us, it's really important. Yeah, we do that in the right way. Because business as usual isn't good enough, unfortunately.
And we'll touch on that, because I do agree there will be a lot of opportunities, particularly around people acquiring existing restaurants. But we'll touch on that in a minute. But I think you made a very good point in something else I was listening to, which is around sort of lots of restaurants care about the provenance of the food they buy, don't they? So and they will care about that often from an ethical perspective. So you'd like to think most decent restaurants in the UK, even if you make the decision to sell beef, that hopefully you're not sort of flying your beef over from Argentina and these massive kind of ranches out there where they're cutting down the Amazon, and with a bit of luck you're supporting your local butcher. And if you could just have the same perspective when you're looking at furniture, I heard again you talk about vinyl stickers might be 30% more expensive if they're made in an environmentally conscious way, but actually they're only a couple of quid anyway. So you just want people to think in the same way as you would source your menu, and that's a decent client base there, isn't it?
It should be. I mean, it comes down to convenience in many ways, or a kind of apathy or lack of knowledge, isn't it? I mean, most restaurants, if they are chef-led or people care about food, so it's natural that they understand the quality, the importance of sourcing. I say natural, there are many that don't, but still, you don't sell eggs from, use eggs from caged hens. You use free range. They're more expensive, but you wouldn't think of doing that if you care about food. But you'll use plywood that isn't FSC, so it's not come from a managed timber source. You'll get a bit of furniture. Those chairs are cheap. They're only 20 quid. Get them off Amazon. Well, where's it made? What does it come from? What are those materials? So the same thinking applies to that. But the reality is it's harder because the systems are set up right now to deliver cheaper products and materials to people that need them as quickly as possible. So the challenge we know we're going to face is to develop new systems with the right kinds of suppliers that can create sustainably sourced environments and interiors. And we know that actually means we need to move towards ideas of a circular economy, which is something we discovered about 6 months ago. When we started the journey into sustainability, we were looking at different assessment systems. The question is, how do you actually make sure that this is real? How are you really being sustainable, rather than saying, oh yeah, I got this chair from a local church, so therefore this is sustainable? Okay, well, how do we measure or test that? And we looked into various assessment systems. So there's a really good one called SCA, SKA, which is really super well suited to fit outs and refurbishment, because you can adjust the scope depending on if you're doing small works or big works. And that's really good. You can get bronze, silver, and gold. But the question is, well, what is gold? Is gold enough? Is that actually going to mean the planet's okay if everyone does scar gold? Similarly, you get the quantitative measuring systems like carbon footprint. Everyone kind of understands that a bit more. Carbon, bigger number bad, smaller number or zero good. And we know that greenhouse gas emission is a massive problem. We're trying to get down to net zero by 2050 to avoid climate change. But again, if we get carbon emissions down to zero, is that enough? Is that enough? To me, it seems oversimplified. It's a bit like saying, if I want to have a healthy lifestyle, I should have a calorie-controlled diet. Right. Well, if I only eat 1,000 calories, but it's processed burgers and chocolate, and I don't do any exercise, I will probably lose weight, but I will not have a healthy lifestyle. And similarly, you can reduce your carbon, but treat your staff badly, have all kind of VOCs and chemicals in the material that you're using on the site. So it becomes a broader question. So what this led us to is, and those are both generally useful, what we consider those kind of base camp up the mountain of sustainability. We discovered circular economy, and I don't know if you know much about the principles, but it took me about 3 books to get my head around exactly what it means. But effectively, it's looking at how we can design out waste, how we can remove and avoid pollution, and how we can keep natural resources at their highest level in what's called the value chain. So, for example, last year, I think, what was it, 2018? 100 billion tons of natural resources were taken out of the ground by human beings. And of that, only 8 or 9% have been kept in what we'd call a circular system, i.e. still being used at the level they are extracted. The other 90-odd billion tons of resources head down the value chain from being stone into rubble, into aggregate in the road, into landfill or something like that. And that's actually the problem, is we need to move from this linear economy of take, make, waste to a circular economy where we can actually keep these cycles of resources and energy going through the system at a much higher level. So we are trying to create a design framework that can deliver that, which we've called the Restorative Restaurant. And I reckon it'll be the project for the rest of our working lives. Yeah. To be honest, I think there's a lot to be done there. Hopefully that makes sense.
It does, yeah. Well, what's impressive is you read 3 books and managed to summarise it in 90 seconds, David, and you can answer a question longly as well. So that was particularly impressive. But before we talk about the Restorative Restaurant, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Just specifically around hospitality then, do you think we are particularly bad at this? Have we got a sustainability problem with regard to restaurant design, I suppose, and how they're built? And if so, why is that?
That's a very interesting question. Do I think hospitality has a sustainability problem? Yes and no. I mean, you could look at several examples of people doing great things. I'm sure the industry as a whole is better than it was maybe 10 years ago. I look to the Sustainable Restaurant Association and what they've been doing. Andrew Stephen and the team there do great work in kind of pushing this agenda. There's more people joining all the time. Clearly, COVID is going to be an issue to this agenda, and people investing time and money, resources into making it happen. But I'd like to think it was getting better. But I think there's, I always, the reason I like hospitality, and I think that it has a chance to have a big impact on the sustainability conversation, is because when you really dig into what the point of being sustainable is because we want to maintain the life we have and human beings. It's about human beings, and hospitality is a people business. It's not a food business, I don't think. People that really care about hospitality are good people that want to be with other people. I always argue that hospitality is the act of inviting someone into your home and cooking them a meal, but it is not the meal or your home. It's the manner of the invitation that is the hospitality. And I think because hospitality people care about people, there is a selflessness in that act that should tie in very well with an attitude towards sustainability. So I'm really hopeful that we can make a big change within the industry and help people come along on this journey with us to make things more sustainable.
No, I think you're right, and I think it goes back to you saying that people who work or people who are interested in sustainability are probably not arseholes often, and it's probably the same in hospitality. Yeah, exactly, and it's the same for most people who work in hospitality. I think to a lot of people, hospitality is a reflex. That sort of you've walked into my space and I'm going to offer you a cup of tea or a beer or a glass of wine is a natural reflex, and you're probably just a decent human thinking about other people's welfare necessarily rather than your own. So yeah, I agree 100%. So back to the framework. So the framework that you were talking about, the restorative restaurant framework.
Yes.
3 elements, the first of which actually makes a great deal of sense, and when I was reading about it, so the first bit relates around demolition and almost just kind of looking at the premises initially and working out what are we going to take out, what are we going to do with it. Would you say that's all too often missed, and I suppose what are you looking at under that?
Yeah, very much so. I think we, particularly as designers, we're often guilty if we want to come in and avoid any compromise on this beautiful new design coming in, and we don't want to work with the gifts of a site. We want to strip it out, not deal with the headaches, make it easy, and then just do something brilliant, which is partly an ego-driven thing. Part of the problem with design is that design is effectively a confidence game. It's a very arrogant business to say there's a new thing that needs to be done and I'm the person to bring this magical thing into life. So to be a good designer, you can't really operate with any self-doubt because you're making these creative decisions all the time about the way the world should be. Unfortunately, that means that a lot of designers who are very good at that move from confidence into arrogance and ego, and therefore it's kind of the opposite of what hospitality
that can happen with chefs sometimes as well.
It can't it? Yeah, generally men too. I mean, let's be honest. It's mainly men are awful at that whole that whole piece. But yeah, I think for us it does start. I mean, if you want to try and create circular restaurants, you need to look at how you can complete the circle. So when you go in to take a space, the point is, well, before we do anything, the most sustainable thing you can do is do nothing.
Yeah.
Do literally do nothing, and you'll not be making a dent in the world.
Yeah.
But if you are going to go in, whether it is into a shell or something that used to be a shop that you're converting to a restaurant, or it was a previous restaurant and you're trying to convert it into a different restaurant, you need to go in and actually audit what's there. And that's both intangible kind of rational terms, what ovens have they got, can we reuse them, and intangible, like what's the quality of the space here, how is the building made, what gifts have we got of this site that we can actually celebrate. And then when you've worked out what is going to work with your concept, because that is another massively important thing I would say, is that you can't, let me put this another way, the most sustainable restaurant is the one that's still here in 10 years' time. So you need to create an experience for your customers that is hugely successful, where you make profit as a company that you can do good things with, but ultimately you're still here serving customers in 10 years' time. Because if you put in the most eco, hemp-clad concept and stick it into Mayfair and it lasts 6 months, it doesn't matter what your goals were, you weren't successful. So all that time and energy is going to go in the skip probably, because someone else is going to put something in suitable for Mayfair. So you need to make sure that whatever you do create is in tune with the DNA of the experience and the brand you need to be successful there. So there's a bit of an equation to work out there. You keep what you can, but you need to not compromise the overall why you're actually bothering to do this. But then when you decide that some things need to change and come out, you then have to have an active strategy for how you deal with that waste. And that's often the bit that gets missed, particularly if you are running fast on a low budget and you aren't working with particularly professional contractors. So how do you get rid of that waste you're getting rid of? If you've got chairs, how can we keep those at the highest value, i.e. as a chair? Can we give them to charity? Can we actually sell them? Most people won't go through that because there's not a lot of money to be made in it. It's an effort. But these are the important things we need to do. How do we not get rid of that stuff? How do we not waste it? Then you start going down the scale. So how do we keep materials at their same level? We've got stainless steel. How can we make sure that's recycled and kept as stainless steel? Then going down again, you've got downcycling. So we've taken down a brick wall. If you can't reuse the bricks again on site, how can we get them somewhere where they're going to be turned into rubble in that sense and used elsewhere? And then you get all the way down to the lowest level, which is kind of incineration for energy recovery. You need to think through that, and you need to find partners who can can actually deliver that. And we're still in the process of making sure we have those partners, to be completely honest. But it's even just talking through that, you can see that there's an effort in there that, frankly...
Well, it's the same in your home, I think, isn't it? Sometimes you're having to clear out of your garage. It's a lot easier just to chuck the stuff in the bin or take it down the tip than it is to put it on eBay or Marketplace, or even if it's for free, and say, can you come around and get it? And then you've got to be in and somebody's got to meet. And it's the same kind of concept.
I've definitely been guilty of that. I like an easy life.
Yeah.
It is inconvenient, and I don't want to, to have to do that. Yeah. So my personal philosophy is I would love a more simple life where you just say no and I have less, less stuff and less responsibility. That's number one. But yeah, when you've got it, when it's there, you've got to deal with it in a responsible way.
Yeah, my wife's a primary school teacher, and primary school kids love, bright, shiny things, arts and crafts, and glitters and paints and pots and stuff. And you see the Amazon guy arriving at the door again with another delivery of plastic shite, and worry for the future of humanity. Back now, I can tell her there's 90 billion tons or whatever of stuff it was being extracted from the earth every year. I've tried, to be fair, and she tells me I can go and live in the shed. But I agree with you immensely. I think I get that. So then you move on from demolition, and it certainly made me think, and I was like, and I go back to, built and refurbed a number of restaurants and wondered what I would have done differently. I actually get really excited by the idea of reusing as much as you possibly can, and almost using sustainability as an excuse, because actually from a cost perspective,
well, in that instance, the cost has a kind of a very positive effect as well. That can be a very frugal approach that can be sustainable at the same time. So that's the positive side of saving money and sustainability, I think, definitely. And I think as designers, we need to take that as a creative challenge. The great creativity comes from working around constraints, and we need to find better ways to do that. You can keep the same chairs and go and get them reupholstered. People have been doing this this isn't new, this isn't magic. People have been doing this for ages. But it needs to be done on a larger scale. There need to be systems, for this to happen, and be the norm. Yeah. It needs to be the normal approach.
Okay. So stage 2, low impact design.
Yes.
What's a low impact?
Yeah, and I think this is where the framework gets. It becomes interesting, and it also starts to diverge a bit, because at that point you've probably got different approaches for very different types of restaurant. So if you're going into a brand new shell that's been developed in a lovely restaurant area in King's Cross that's a blank canvas, you can look at many different facets of that design. So you can have more control over the equipment that's going in. You can look at the embodied carbon and the energy usage. You can look at every single thing that comes into that site, and you've got much more control. Whereas in other sites, if you're refurbing an existing restaurant, you've probably got less things that you can actually adjust and make a meaningful difference to, if that makes sense. So the way we look at, there's sort of 5 strands to the low impact design section that we look at. One is defining your assessment system. So how do you want to measure what you're doing? And there's the qualitative way, which I mentioned SCAR, I think, is the best. There's also BREEAM and LEED, but they're really better for new builds. And then there's the quantitative one, where you can look at the carbon footprint if you want to get into assessing that. So that might cost you, £3,000 to look at what the carbon footprint of your fit out's going to be. There's another one we're looking at, which is, can we measure the tons of life cycle waste measured from a new fit out, produced by a new fit out? So we're trying to find a quantifiable metric where we can start measuring the circularity, which is a bit of a tricky, nebulous thing to get to. And then actually there is a third way of looking at sustainability, and I sort of touched on it earlier in a sort of flippant way, but there is a narrative part of sustainability, and that is the storytelling part, like this chair is from a local church. And I am still interested in that part, because I think we need to remember that sustainability isn't just about doing the right thing, but it's about communicating with your customers. And there is a simplicity to someone sitting on a chair and knowing where it's come from that communicates much better than, oh, hey, our carbon footprint is reduced by 16%, and actually we've got SCAR Gold. Okay, what does that mean? I don't understand. Tell me a story. So I think you look at how you're going to capture and assess and communicate your sustainable story. And then you look at operational carbon, i.e. what carbon emissions are produced in the running of your restaurant on a day-to-day basis, and that would be through water, electricity, gas. So you're looking at energy efficient equipment, whether you can use heat recovery systems to capture heat from the extract hood to kind of power the heating systems, whether you can capture rainwater and use that in grey water systems for the toilets, well, you can do all of that. And then you look at embodied carbon, i.e. what is the footprint of stuff we're getting in here? Are we shipping plywood from China, or can we get some material locally that's going to have a much lower footprint? Does it have recycled content in it? Many different things within there. And then there are two things on the design side. One, flexibility, which I'm increasingly becoming quite passionate about. I think we need to design buildings and spaces that are able to adapt to future changes. If anything, that's been highlighted.
Yeah, like a pandemic.
Yeah, like a pandemic. Yeah, exactly. That's a good example.
Yeah.
We need to, and as designers, we've never been massively keen on this, because I always use the example of a penknife. At this point, is that if you want something to do many different functions, like a penknife, inevitably it's going to end up with a slightly generic design. It's going to look like a penknife, right? And the whole point of restaurant design and what we're trying to do is to create differentiation. So as a designer a few years ago, I would have said, look, let's try and get the minimum amount of flexibility in here that you can get a good operation, but that we can get the purest customer experience. And I've sort of changed my mind on this recently and realised that actually, no, our job as designers is to creatively find ways to build flexibility in. So we're sitting here with some booth seats inside your restaurant. I bet you'd love if you could do something different with those.
I'd love to press a button,
yes,
depending on who was coming in the door, whether you were a table of two, a
yeah,
group of six, whether you've got kids, no kids, and literally things would disappear and appear out of the floor by magic,
yeah,
and reconfigure themselves. So yeah, flexibility is key in restaurants. Just time of the day, and this comes up on the podcast a lot, but how a restaurant feels at 8 a.m. for breakfast service and how it feels for cocktails at 10 o'clock at night is completely different. So we do that through music and through lighting, but you've got to be careful. Historically, you could get away with just having an evening cocktail bar and that was fine, but with business rates and all the costs that come with it now and fit out costs and everything, you've probably got to sweat that asset a lot more than you have. The margins are so much smaller. So yeah, flexibility is key for many reasons, I suppose. Yeah,
I think so. And then and part of that as well is the idea around flexibility goes beyond self-interest. It's not just about making sure that the restaurant can flex within its operation. It's trying to think about how we are sort of almost stewards of the buildings we're in, how we're guardians of those, and leaving them in a way for the next person. You're not going to be here in 50 years' time, probably. But
lucky to be here in 5 days if Boris has his way, to be honest. But that's a whole other topic.
But those questions, when we're talking about flexibility, and this is where I find it interesting because we need to have more discussions with landlords. What are landlords creating with their buildings? How are they allowing for as much flexibility for their tenants coming in? How can we create services and service points that allow for more change in the future if you want to move your kitchen somewhere else? I don't know if that's possible at the moment. So these are kind of questions we're asking and trying to find out the answer. And then alongside flexibility is the question of layout design. So that's kind of obvious, but how can we design the layout in a way that maximizes the sustainable qualities? So how do we maximize natural daylight? How do we build in lobbies to make sure you get a thermal break between inside and outside? How can you put the layout the kitchen so that you're keeping the refrigeration as far away from the cook line as possible, so things aren't working so hard? All of those questions need to be looked at.
Yeah, no, they're really good points. I've always thought with this one, we built this restaurant. Is it now 12 years ago, I think, and the backdrop to you at the moment is the ocean, and we're maybe 6 foot, maybe a little bit less above sea level, and I've been constantly and we thought about the environment immediately, and things have moved on, and there's clearly so much more we can do. But you're right, that sort of idea of being a custodian is that it's highly likely that the sea levels will rise and this place won't be here, so we have a permanent reminder, just 50 foot away, of the fragility, I suppose, of what we do, and that if we don't get this right, this restaurant will be washed away, and lots of people won't be able to sit here and enjoy a nice icy cold beer overlooking the ocean, let alone all the other problems that will come with.
I'm sure you can have a floating restaurant concept for your ground floor here, can't you?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right. Actually, we've got
very
a first
Instagrammable.
Floor. We'll be fine. But yeah, those reminders, and I do agree with what you were just saying there around the sort of SCAR and LEED and some of these big initiatives that you need to buy into. They often do feel like they're better placed with big corporates. And I sort of get it. If M&S come out and say, look, we're going to reduce our environmental footprint by 12% or something like that, I'll just go, okay, they're big. That's probably an important thing. It's probably good. But actually, in restaurants, we're used to telling stories. We want to tell you about the farmer who rears your pigs. We want to tell you about the vineyard in the south of Italy that makes this incredible wine. We're predisposed to have these conversations. So if we can tell you that the table you're sat at, especially here by the ocean, if we can say, look, we went and collected 5 tons of plastic rubbish from the ocean and then turned it into this table that you're sat at, people will get that and they'll go, oh, that's really, really cool. Whereas if I go, I've got a SCAR Gold, it'll be less relevant, I suppose. Does it feel like some of those that certain clients you work with would want the kind of almost internationally accredited thing to put on the wall, but actually some of the independents would
I think it's really interesting. We've been spending quite a lot of time thinking about this recently as we're sort of building the framework and the approach, and thinking about the difference between narrative, qualitative and quantitative, very long words, approaches. I think it is horses for courses. I mean, I was on a workshop last week with Intercontinental Hotel Group, and they've got 6,000 hotels, ridiculous numbers, and any conversations there are immediately around ROI. How much is it going to cost? And in a way, I think it's just natural that the bigger a company goes, reality for a big company exists on a spreadsheet. You can't manage it any other way. So the finance director needs to see what a number is and how that's going to be affected in the bottom right-hand corner of the spreadsheet. That's the only way that they can capture the reality of a big business that big. So therefore, they talk about science-based targets, and they talked about carbon because it's something measurable, and no one can argue against that. The critics can't argue against it. But for us, I mean, we tend to specialise working with people with 1 to 5, 5 to 10, restaurant units. And with them, most people, the quantifiable metrics are not as important as the qualitative. People that come to us and want to talk about sustainability genuinely care about sustainability. And therefore you're in more of a conversation around the narrative, i.e. what are we doing and why, and how we tell that, communicate that to customers. But then the assessment of something like a SCAR makes sure that we're holding ourselves to account. And actually, SCAR doesn't have to be, you can actually do SCAR informally without actually even paying any money to assess it. We now, as default, run SCAR assessments on every single one of our projects we do. And we can do that along with an assessor, and that'll cost like 2, 3, 4 grand depending on the project. Or we can just get it assessed at the end for about 500 quid. Or if the client really isn't interested, then you don't have to get through the assessment. But we're using it to hold ourselves to account on every part.
So is this kind of a list of 100 points or whatever? Is this kind of a framework that you look at?
Yeah. So SCAR is there's 112 best practice measures, and they will cover every part of a potential fit out. For example, chairs. For example, one of the measures is chairs, and then how many? It's kind of quite black and white, but there's maybe 3 or 4 ways you can hit it. Have you reduced 75% from going to landfill? Have you used reclaimed? There's different ways of going through the measures, and you either hit them or you don't. Countertops, for example, is it a reclaimed material? Yes or no? If not, if it's a virgin material, has it got 80% recycled content or higher? Yes or no? So you kind of go through, and then you will go through and assess your project. So if you're doing a light refurb, you might only have 52 of those measures are in scope.
Right.
You can't do something about toilets if your toilets aren't changing. You're not changing anything.
Right.
And then to get gold, you might need to hit 40 of those, silver 25, bronze 15, for example.
But they're not behind a paywall. These are fundamentally available. You can see them, assess them yourself.
Yeah,
because it's frustrating. I sympathise, and Andrew Stephen and I have had this conversation a few times around the SRA objectives and the fact that he needs to put some of their content behind a paywall because fundamentally it's the members that pay for their existence. Yet their fundamental objective is to make restaurants more sustainable, which clearly isn't a money-making thing, and it's probably similar with stuff like that. So I think the more they can put out just to make a difference,
Yeah.
great. But then obviously, it makes sense that some people need to pay in
Yeah,
some way for the
and that's
accreditation.
with our experience. So when you look at things like BRIAM, or so much of this is just so onerous and massive in scale. You need to pay a consultant £5,000 to just do it. And if you're coming in and refurbish your restaurant, you want to spend 100, 200, 300, whatever you're paying. It just seems like a crazy amount of overkill. Doing a brand new development, BRIAM makes a huge amount of sense. But yeah, SCAR, what we've just found is really interesting. And if anyone wants to know about it, then go and have a look online or get in contact with me, and I can certainly give you a quick tour around it. We did some training on it last year to make sure we know what we're doing, and then we spent, I think, January or February, we went through every single best practice measure and identified kind of partners or people that we can do, what we'd need to do to deal with all of those. So we've been immersing ourselves in that, because it's finding a way to hold yourself to account, because it's easy to just tell yourself you're being sustainable.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I get the middle bit, sort of stage 2 of the restorative sort of process of restaurants, because that's kind of what we think about, I guess, certainly kit-wise and water usage, all that kind of stuff day to day. So we probably thought less about it in demolition. But the third one I thought was really interesting. So this is this end of life aspect, isn't it? And I'm like, we definitely didn't think about that. So can you just explain that?
And that's something that's come for us out of looking into the circular economy. So if you can imagine this diagram for the restorative restaurant, it is, a circle, and there's 3 arrows going around. The first one is demolition and strip out, as you said. Then the middle one is low impact design, and the last one is end of life. Because the whole point is we're trying to create designs and environments that can be stripped out again when they go around the next cycle, in a way that is going to keep everything at the highest point in the value chain. So end of life means that we need to design and specify things in a different way. We need to design them so that they can be disassembled. Because, for example, if you have a lovely new countertop you put in, and you've sourced a great material, it's 80% recycled content, it's local labour's put it in, it's brilliant, you've done good. But then you glue it to a piece of wood. Well, that now isn't sustainable at the end of the life. If you're not going to get those apart, that's going to go in the skip, because you've created what the cradle-to-cradle people call a monstrous hybrid.
Right.
So we need to look at how we design things in a way that they can be taken apart. And then there's 2 different, they call it nutrient streams. There's technical and biological nutrients.
That was my next question. What do you mean by biological and technical nutrient scheme?
Again, there's a great book called Cradle to Cradle, but it's quite dense. And
luckily, you're going to summarise it in 2 sentences.
Well, there you go. The biological nutrients are anything that would naturally break down into the earth. Okay. So if you think of wood, paper, that sort of stuff, that will
How many chapters was that in the book?
Yeah, exactly. Technical nutrients are more synthetic, man-made things. So we're talking about metal. We're talking about plastics, I suppose, as well. So the idea is that you want to create things. If you're thinking of a chair, if you've got a metal base and timber slats on it or upholstery, all of that needs to be able to come apart in such a way that it can be reused again at the highest value. You want the metal to be able to be used as metal, ideally on legs for a chair, rather than something lower down. So much of recycling, unfortunately, is actually downcycling. We're moving something that was higher value. If you have a lovely brick wall, for example, and then you take down that brick wall and it gets bashed up into rubble and used in aggregate in a road, that is not keeping this crafted thing at a high value. It's bringing it down the chain, and ultimately that is not a sustainable system. So we need to design for end of life, and part of it is design for disassembly. It's also puts a huge amount more onus on us as designers to look at what happens to materials at the end of their life. Are there manufacturer take-back schemes on fabric that's used, or carpets that are used on a floor? Are there ways that we can definitely be sure they can be reused again? So for us, it's asking tougher questions on how they can be, how we can make sure they are being used properly at the end. And this is going to be a tough bit, to be honest.
It is. It's fascinating, brilliant, really good, but really difficult.
That is the gap that exists between the end of one thing and the beginning of the next.
Yeah. And almost how much of that becomes changes in recycling. I look at our waste and how separate it is. Funny enough, we just changed waste contractors, and my financial controller pinged out a little email yesterday saying that the new waste contractors have said if we want to go and have a look around their sort of facility, we're more than welcome. And I think she was sort of half joking, and certainly for most of the team, they would have gone, go and look around where the rubbish goes. But straight away I was like, I 100% want to go, because the more I can understand about how do they process our waste, the more impact we can have on what are we actually putting in the bin. So at the moment, I'm guessing if you chuck a chair in the tip, it's probably cost prohibitive for someone there to unstitch the upholstery and separate it. But if it was designed in a way with a bit of Velcro or something that you could undo it and chuck one in one pot and one in the other, that would be brilliant. But it still is going to need somebody, at some point. It's such a joint. There's so many people involved, I suppose, and it's got to be such a joint.
And that's why for us we've realised the great thing about circular economy, and also the tough thing about circular economy, is that you cannot do it on your own. Yeah. It's collaborative. It has to be collaborative because you need to create ecosystems where this stuff can circulate around. That means there's a huge amount of opportunities for interesting things. So there are many ways of you start to look at it when you look at things from a circular perspective. So you start thinking, well, hang on a sec, why do people own chairs? What there are a few furniture people we're talking to where they want to look at the idea of moving to a subscription economy. So they then have the responsibility to deal with those chairs for their whole life. So you rent the chairs off of them. They're responsible for the maintenance, looking after them. And if you go bust or you change them, whatever, they're responsible to come and get those chairs, and then they will take them back and they will use those chairs in a way to reupholster them, fix them, break them down, and get their next set of products out. So it's really interesting when you start looking at the circular aspect, you come up with some slightly different business models. The whole point of subscription economy could be a really interesting way of looking at these things in a different manner.
It does require so many people, but hopefully having conversations like this just inspires more and more people to think about it, I suppose, with a bit of luck, doesn't it? I've also heard you talk about the sort of Simon Sinek's book The Infinite Game, and trying to you transpose that infinite philosophy into design and into hospitality. So is that anything different to what you've already said? What's this sort of concept of infinite, I suppose?
Yeah, that's interesting. I did philosophy at school as one of my subjects, and I completely admit to loving the world of ideas and thinking about it, but I like to bring it straight back to the everyday humanity, not some sort of strange abstract piece. I really like the way Simon Sinek talks about this idea of the infinite game. His whole point is that we need to move from this finite mindset of trying to make profit for a quarter and actually look at genuine long-term vision for the health of companies. And if you take that outside of business, I just think it's a really smart way that we as human beings need to look at what we're doing. You need to have an infinite mindset whereby it is not about, can we just make a profit this quarter? That for me is one of the massive reasons between the casual dining crash, was that people come on, someone's built a restaurant chain where they've got 3 sites, they've sold it to a VC, or a VC's come in and they've gone, right, how do we get our ROI in 5 years? Okay, great, let's grow it to 15 sites. Okay, how are we going to do that quickly? How are we going to do it with the least amount of money? There's a very singular metric around finance. And then everyone's trying to jump through these hoops to get those quarterly goals, taking on sites maybe with the wrong kind of rent structure, not running them properly, not investing in the right staff training. Oh, how can we cut costs on food? Okay, let's get the quality down. Telling themselves and not getting the quality down.
I was going to say, is that an actual mission?
Yeah. But, convincing themselves.
It's the inevitable.
And they'll get to 15 and then they sell it to another VC that goes, great, wow, this is doing really well. Okay, how can we get this to 45?
Yeah.
And it's, nothing's looking beyond the horizon of 3 to 5 years. Yeah. And that is the point. We need to think beyond ourselves, as individuals and even as companies. And Simon Sinek's point, the infinite game, is really interesting because he looks at how the best companies are run by people who do look at things beyond themselves. Patagonia is a great example in the clothing world. They managed to combine that purpose and profit in a way that I find quite inspiring. Nice bag.
Yeah.
Whether
just pointing at my Patagonia bag for those of you who are wondering why we've just gone off. But yeah, go on.
Whether humanity and human beings on a big enough scale are able to get away from our natural self-interest is a very different philosophical question. Maybe one beyond this podcast.
Yeah.
But
do you think?
Yeah. But no, I think it's hugely important, and that's why I come back to my own personal philosophy is. So I'm not an activist. I want to get to a point where I make sure I give more than I take, and that for me is a long-term vision beyond self-interest. I want to live a generous life, live in a generous house with my kids, eat lovely food, travel and see things. But I don't want to do that in a way that comes at any other person's expense or our planet's expense, because that just doesn't stack up. So, yeah, that is the infinite game for me. Trying to find a path to make that happen. And our restorative restaurant framework at OSP is our current best way of exploring.
Yeah, that's good. And so I think all of that, love it. It definitely got me thinking and thinking about future stuff we've done, like I say, some of our past stuff. But I guess with all of this, you can create a really sustainable restaurant that is a shit restaurant. Mm-hmm. And that would obviously be stupid. And where I was particularly keen and excited to talk to you is that you're clearly a thinker and a reader and a bit of an obsessive is the impression I get. And I love obsessives in hospitality. It's full of them. And for those who've listened to other podcasts, whether it be, I've got one coming out next week just about salt. I can spend an hour talking about salt, or whether it be gin or whatever it might be. But you're obsessed not just with sustainability, but fundamentally how do restaurants work? What makes a good restaurant a bad restaurant? What makes them successful fundamentally and still be there, like you say? And I think one of the ways that illustrates that obsession, but more importantly, this sort of understanding of the intangibles of what makes a restaurant successful or not, was your Restaurant Odyssey project, pre-pandemic, almost probably pre you putting that word sustainable at the top of your website. What was that about, I suppose, first of all?
Well, I think when we really nailed our colours to the mast in terms of being about hospitality design, before we then also nailed it about sustainable hospitality design, I wanted to make sure that we knew everything we possibly could about what makes great restaurants. So the Restaurant Odyssey was me. It's a fantastic project to be doing. Going to a restaurant every 2 weeks, identify things that I think are the 26 best restaurants in London across fine dining and also more casual. Just going and studying that, eating there, engaging in the experience, mapping out how it felt. So there's a great book by Camilla Laura Sitwell called Bespoke, where she talks of the future of hospitality being about personalisation. And in there, she sketches out this experience map, this kind of, I can't remember if it was 17 points that touch every part of the customer journey. And I took that and I adjusted it a little bit, and I used that as part of my guide to assess different experiences. So, what makes Padella great? Why is there a queue outside Padella all the time? I don't know if you know Padella, just outside Borough Market. I've come to the conclusion that the reason there's a queue outside Padella is because there's a queue outside Padella, which starts becoming a very self-reinforcing piece of logic.
That's a circular, isn't it?
Exactly. Other than that, I actually think the location is great. I think they made a smart move with the massive awning and the very simple, bold branding against a more kind of refined fit out in some sense. But anyway, there's lots of other things there. But so for me, it was trying to analyse the experience and understand why different brands need different things. So you start to realise across these 17 points, you don't need to do all of them well to be successful. The higher up you go in terms of Michelin stars and premium experience, you do need to be better at all of these points. And they cover marketing, location choice, how your staff service acts, the quality of the food, and obviously the quality of the environment, which is the bit that we're most interested in influencing. But it was interesting to see that some of the really good ones might skip entirely 50% of these points in the experience, particularly ones where they don't take any bookings, they don't email you beforehand, they don't follow up afterwards. There's none of that, but they've got maybe a great location, fantastic social media presence, and a lot of buzz around them. And then they deliver really good food in a kind of cool environment. Maybe the staff even aren't that good, but there's some kind of rough diamond in some of those. So that whole project was me trying to analyse what makes these things interesting, and realising that it's a combination of rational and completely irrational factors. And that the irrational thing is a thing that really fascinates me now, because you get into the question of behavioural science and behavioural economics. So my favourite book that I think I reference all the time is one called Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. It's the power of ideas that don't make sense. And I've given this story a few times before, but he talks about this coffee shop that he drove past a few times, and the two previous owners, they had both failed. They had opened, hadn't done very well, failed after 6 months. And then this third guy opens, and he's driving past and goes, "Oh, okay, another one. Hope he does okay. Hope he does good." And sure enough, 6 months later, the guy's still doing well. So he's like, "Okay, I wonder what he's doing different." And he drove past. He hadn't been in at this point. He drove past, and he just saw one morning, he's bringing all this heavy outdoor furniture out, and all these barriers, and it's quite elaborate exterior seating much more than the other people. It's clearly an effort. It's clearly not, a value engineered solution. He could do something much easier for himself. And that's kind of the point. That's the conclusion he comes to, is as a human being, you walk past and you go, oh wow, he really cares about putting that furniture out. I bet his coffee's good. Because if he cares that much about doing that he didn't need to do, I bet he doesn't cut corners inside either. And so that, for me, really sums up the power of understanding the signalling of what we do as designers and as restaurateurs. I think everything comes down to the signals you give out to your potential customers about what you do. And that's why very often the things that we think are unnecessary are precisely necessary because of that. Precisely.
I think it's fascinating. I talked to my team about this, and I'm a bit of a fan of cycling. So David Brailsford and his aggregation of marginal gains, these tiny little incremental changes. And it's so hard in hospitality, and I've been saying this for donkey's years, is that we don't know which of these little details, the logo on the toilet door, or how something's worded on the menu, and that customer journey from when they see the website to when they pull up in the car park. No idea really which ones of those make a difference, but I've always been utterly convinced that every tiny little touch point does make a difference. So when you were on that journey then, did you get to all, was it 26, did you say?
Yeah, it was 26. I think I didn't do all of them. I might have stopped at around 22.
Okay. Did the tax man look at your sort of receipts and go, come on, David?
Justifying it to my business partner, saying, no, it's really important.
Yeah, come on.
Research.
Yeah. But was there anything, I suppose, memorable from that sort of journey through those restaurants that where something clicked, either really good or really bad, that sort of had an influence, I suppose, on your sort of future designs?
I think it's interesting. I mean, I've decided that 90% of people don't know how to design toilets properly, which is a separate thing. I don't know why people stop designing when they get to the toilet, or there's obsession with putting a single spotlight in the ceiling, which you get horrific, Bohemian Rhapsody shadows on your face. Anyway, that's a kind of separate pet hate of mine around the fact that most toilets aren't very well designed. I think it was really, the takeout was the sheer complexity. And actually, there's a funny thing, when you become more of an expert, I mean, whether I call myself that, I don't know, that's for other people to say, but if you consider yourself on that journey to become an expert, you realise you let go of a need to know all the answers, because you realise that actually it's not about gathering the answers. What you're looking to do is gather the right toolkit of questions to unpick a certain situation. Does that make sense? So you are realising that actually you don't need to. I first thought, well, you need to hit as many of these experience points as possible on a kind of level 5 out of 5, and that will be your guarantee of success. But actually, it's not about that. You need to do that at the higher end, because at the higher end, the consistency of a premium experience is really important. If you've got, cricket, in London, it's about really great food. It's cool. It's a good location. The design's nice. The staff are friendly. That's enough. That's enough. And it's about finding the right things, doing the right things well, with a sort of sincerity. So it was really, for me, it was an exercise in understanding the complexity and having a kind of developing my own intuition around what is going to work and not work. But yeah, I don't think, there's no easy T-shirt slogan answers that come out of it.
It's the art of the restaurateur rather than the science of a restaurateur, for a reason, I suppose. And I do think it is fascinating and frustrating, because you can sit in one venue, they can be on the same road, and you can sit in one and go, why is this one working and that one not working? And it's really tricky, because you take this fairly sort of, not even fairly, very comprehensive approach, I suppose. I know one of the things that's important to you is, when you sit down, basically somebody doesn't generally just come to you and say, hi David, I want this, design it. You sit with them, and your first question is another Simon Sinek thing, I guess, is why, isn't it? It's why. It's like, I've heard again you say, the world doesn't need any more restaurants, so why do you want to create this one? Why do you need to understand that before you can design them a restaurant?
I think, that's a very interesting question. Why do I want to understand that? I think I'm naturally a big picture guy than a detail guy, and I'm leaning into that. So Brenda, my business partner, is an amazing, wonderful human being and a great architect, and naturally has this affinity with the detail and the question. And we kind of, we kind of informally split our roles. I'm the director of making things happen, and he's the director of doing it well. And I think there's a kind of nice dynamic with that. But I just think there's so much stuff that gets done without someone actually asking the question, why are we doing this again? And it's easy to get lost in that detail as you go along. Whereas for me, I've realised I'm quite a simple soul, and I just want to know, what is the point of us doing this? So, for example, I met with a potential client last week, and we're looking at, they're halfway through this refurb in the project. They wanted a second design opinion. Is this good? Is it going to work? And taking a step back, it's in a bank, and they want to redo their catering offer internally, and they're really keen on sustainability. So this is, potentially a really good match. They've got these designs, and my first question is, why are your employees going to want to eat here? Because you're in London, there's a lot of cool stuff outside, and no one can answer that question. So if you can't answer that question, how do you know whether what you're building is even going to compare against that really simple answer? I mean, you don't have an answer, so how do you know if you're going to be successful? And I think often the success of a project needs to be defined with this sort of emotional or vision question. It's not, we need to improve our margin by 10%, so therefore we want to refit this part of a restaurant to encourage and increase spend or average transaction value. But that's not a goal. That's not a vision. That's not getting anyone excited. What is the bigger point here of what we're doing? And then we can use that to assess whether the project is successful or not. And I think that's really important. I like a simple page in a presentation with one point that says what we're trying to achieve, that you can't run away from.
That makes you worth a small fortune, in the fact that the failure rate in hospitality is huge.
It is.
You must get asked then, or with all of that knowledge, and again, all of the reading you do and your obsessive nature, and while still admitting that there's an art here and therefore you can't answer all the questions, you must get told the why from some people and see what they want to do and go, I think it's a bit of a crap idea. Do you therefore turn it away, or do you give some advice, and do they listen? Because people who've got an idea and have been working on it for a long time, probably the reason the failure rate is so high, they're pretty adamant they're going to do it anyway. How do you manage that complexity?
I think it's very interesting. I don't think I have all the answers for that. I think for me, our decision, I say our decision to work for someone, that sounds massively arrogant, like we've got some queue of people desperate to work with us and we're picking and choosing clients, which is not necessarily the case quite yet. But I think we want to work with good people trying to do good things, and the important thing is that we give advice that has integrity to it. And if someone is doing something and I don't think it's going to be a good idea, I will happily tell them that and why I think that is the case. But if they want to carry on and try and make that happen, then that's fine. Whether we're the right partners for that or not, I don't know. For example, this project in the bank. So they've said, can we adjust the design? And I've said, look, I don't think I can add value at this point. I think you should carry on with what you're doing. And after
enjoy
it's
your
done,
empty restaurant.
You're currently mid-car crash. I'm not going to say that, but that's kind of what you're doing. And maybe there's a point where we come back afterwards and ask the why and how questions.
Okay.
And rather than me try and jump in and make something happen here. And I just think,
I hope they've thought about how they're going to dismantle that restaurant at the end.
Well, that's going to be one of my bits of feedback. Yeah, make sure it's designed for disassembly.
Yeah. Quite
I'm
quickly.
not saying it's bad, but make sure you can take it apart afterwards. But I think we want to work with people who are trying to do good things, and I certainly don't have all the answers. And there are ideas that someone might think is I might think is a bad idea that someone else can really make work. But it is a complex one. This is where I came back to. You made that initial point about people that care about sustainability aren't arseholes, and that's the main thing for me. Working with good people that want to do good things, and there's many different shades of grey within that, black and white scale. We were working with a client at the beginning of the year. It was a concept coming over from Lebanon. Got introduced to the client by a hospitality consultant we worked with before. Started the first couple of weeks, got a very bad feeling about the client, the way they were making decisions, the way they were treating people, and we kind of resigned and gave him his money back. And we lost $3,000 doing that. But you've just got I wasn't going to put our team through working with someone like that who was just didn't seem to have it all together and was making some very irrational, mean-spirited decisions. You've got to try and align yourself with people doing things that match your values, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I often say, I go to meetings with my accountants or solicitors. We have a little peer group where we all run different businesses, sort of all directors of our own businesses. And the one thing that they've all got that they can do is they can choose to work with certain clients. And how I would love to just line everybody up who wants to come into the restaurant during the course of the day, and just as they come in, just go, can I just ask, are you a bit of a twat? And if they say, oh yeah, actually I am, I think, brilliant. There is a harvester just 100 metres along the prom, and they would love to look after you. And if people do, but we can't do that. We have to let all these people in. And you don't really find out they're a bit of a twat until they tell you that unless you give them their meal for free, they're going to go on TripAdvisor and write about you. But that is another hour. Actually, I haven't done one on all that kind of.
Well, you've interviewed Andrea from Mercato Metropolitano, didn't you? They have a no Coke policy. You have to check in your other food before you're allowed in the market, which I just think is
take out all brands.
Hilarious.
It's brilliant, isn't it? I'd love, like you say, you have to have quite a lot of clients queuing up to have the balls to go, let me check in your bag, and if there's any brands I don't like, basically you're leaving them at the door. But
it's a fine line between the control freak and kind of judging people.
Yes, definitely.
And having a set of values to support a movement, isn't it? I think you can only pull it off if it represents something bigger than yourself.
It's true, yeah. And again, not that I'm inundated with potential sponsors for the podcast, but I recognise I've made my life difficult for myself because anybody fundamentally runs a big multinational brand. I'm kind of like, look, I am generally banging the drum and supporting the little guy, but then, that doesn't apply to necessarily where you get your booze from. I've said this before, probably on the podcast, but we tried to open a craft beer bar where we had no recognised multinational brands, and for 3 years, we were sort of pretty adamant that we weren't going to have any. And then I think I ended up interviewing Charlie McVeigh, and who had the was it the Draft House, I think, yeah. And he was like, yeah, you just need to get over yourself. And in the end, we'd done it before I spoke to Charlie, but I think it was Estrella that we put in, and instantaneously, it wasn't just the best-selling beer; it outsold all of the other beers on the bar completely. And the definition of a sustainable restaurant is a restaurant that's still there. So sometimes you've just got to compromise and go, you know what? And actually, it's a decent product and it's got a decent backstory. Estrella are not sponsoring the podcast, although if you're interested, Estrella, and you're listening, yours for let's come up with a number. Right, finally getting towards the end because we should. You blog a lot. Why?
I do. I've always liked clarifying my thoughts through writing. I enjoy the process, and I think I'd probably drive my friends, partners, everyone insane if I didn't have an outlet for that. I think it forces you or me to hone my thinking and make sure that we're pushing ourselves on. I enjoy the process of learning. I'm kind of addicted to that process of learning, I just find it an outlet for doing that, and hopefully also because that is a natural thing for me. I mean, I've done it since GCSE. I remember even doing probably my art teacher who just made me start sitting down. Everything I did, I had to then write about why I'd done it. And that at 16 or 14, that was the first time I started doing it. I thought, oh yeah, why am I doing that? And because I'm naturally, it's really funny, I'm not actually naturally an artistic, creative person. I went to a grammar school. I did 4 A-levels, English, 2 in philosophy, and 1 in art. And throughout my GCSEs and my art and my A-levels, art was always my worst subject. And I kept coming. I got a B. I was a terrible student. But I didn't get it. I couldn't. My rational brain that understood English literature and the kind of the quirks of that, and philosophy and these kind of not purely scientific ways of thinking, I still couldn't quite understand and grasp the intangible aspects of kind of art and creativity and design, and that fascinated me. And I've been trying to solve that problem and understand. So I've kind of come at this from a very thoughtful perspective because I'm getting to understand why I love creativity and the kind of the acts of being creative as a designer. So yeah, blogging is my outlet for continuing to think about that. And I'm kind of naturally a connector. I like to find ideas and put them together and understand the way that they go. So whether it's looking at donor economics and how that offers a way to really understand economic theory and change it to be more in support of circular economy, and how circular economy can actually look to change the design world, and how we look at hospitality. I like stretching myself to think on that scale to see what we can learn.
Yeah, brilliant. I love it. And it often gets pointed out just that the power of writing, and I don't do it enough. I go through, I read a lot of some self-help, for want of a better expression, but books about developing yourself and how to sort of, maximize life, I suppose, and journaling always comes up, and I've written a couple of bits, but it reminded me when I read your blog, I thought I could almost see the creative journey you were going on, because there's some fascinating topics. You do it really regularly, some really good stuff on there, very helpful if you happen to be doing some research for a podcast, because you can read all about your thoughts in advance. But I thoroughly recommend that people go and take a look. Talking of which, what's your website? Where should people go to see more of what's going on in your head?
objectspaceplace.com.
Perfect. And on the social channel, you're on
we're on
I said the business. How about you personally?
Yeah, me personally, the best place to find me is on LinkedIn, which is my second home. I put a lot of stuff out daily on there of what I'm thinking or seeing or sharing. I mean, the idea is to try and be as helpful as possible to people in hospitality who want to know about sustainability and design. So a lot of the stuff that goes on there doesn't make it onto our blog, because that's like a daily sharing platform for me and connecting people, and I kind of enjoy that. So yeah, just connect with me, search for David Chenery on LinkedIn. I'll be the smiling one, go from there.
Not behind a mask. Perfect. Look, thanks for doing what you do. I love this industry because of its diversity. The point of this podcast was never about just interviewing chefs or operators. There's so many elements. It's why it's the humans of hospitality. It doesn't matter if you're a farmer, distiller, now design. All of these entwine, and this is why I suppose with what's going on at the moment and the pandemic and how hard hospitality is being hit. When you think of all the knock-on lives, whether it be the fisherman or the egg farmer, so many people are entwined in what is such a huge sector. And probably for me, the point on being on planet Earth is to break bread, have a glass of wine, or have a coffee with someone. Well done for being brave enough to stand up and say, look, not only are we going to do that, but we're going to do that with this backdrop of sustainability, which I think is fantastic. And more than anything, just for, because you give it a decent amount of thought, a bit of a framework and a bit of clarity is really helpful, because we all know we want to be more sustainable, but actually by putting some meat on those bones, so to speak, you really got me thinking when I was doing the research yesterday, and I hope that a lot of other people listening get something out of it as well. So thanks for doing what you do, keep banging that drum, and we'll catch up again in the future.
Great, thanks. I really appreciate that. That's good to hear. That's what we're doing it for, to try and make a difference and help people bridge the gap, rather than just say, here's this crazy goal. So the journey continues.
Keep being crazy. All right, thank you, David.
There you go. Interesting, right? David's really been giving this a great deal of thought on all of our behalves and saving us a huge amount of investigation and research. I will put the links to his website and social channels so you can go and read more and sign up to his very informative and comprehensive blog. Head over to humansofhospitality.co.uk and click on episodes, where you'll find the show notes that accompany this conversation. And whilst you're there, sign up for my weekly newsletter, and a little reminder will appear in your inbox just once a week, letting you know a few details on this week's guests. And if you enjoyed the chat and fancy donating a few quid to keep this podcast on the air, don't forget there's options for that on the website as well, via the Patreon page, or head over to paypal.me/Mark Cribb. Right, I'll be back next Monday. Have a good week.